So good morning. This week's Parsha is called Parshat Naso. It is the longest Parsha of the Torah, of the 54 Parshas of the Torah. Now there are some weeks we do a double. This week we're not doing a double, so it's not as long as some of the doubles. But as a single Parsha, it's the longest Parsha. It begins by Hashem telling Moshe some more instructions regarding the Levites. Last week at the end of the Parsha we spoke about the roles of the family of Kahat, one of the three Levite families in dismantling and carrying and erecting the Mishkan. Kahat was in charge of all of the utensils, all of the furniture in the Mishkan. And now Hashem tells Moshe about the family of Gershon. They're going to be in charge of all the drapings, all the various fabrics that were used mostly for the roofs of the Mishkan, as well as for some walls. They would be in charge of dismantling and carrying and erecting that. And then the third family, Merari, would be in charge of dismantling and erecting the actual walls, which were made of silver, copper, and wood. And they would be in charge of dismantling, carrying, and erecting those. And the Torah continues to tell us so the laws of the three camps. Tells us that there are essentially three camps. There's going to be the temple itself, the Levites around the temple, and then all of Israel around it, described last week. And people that are tamei have to go out of different camps. People that have come in contact with the dead must be outside of the temple. People who have a personal tum'ah that came from their body, a bodily tum'ah, must be outside of the second camp. And anyone who has the disease known as tsaras must be outside of the third camp. Then the Torah tells us if somebody steals and they have to pay back with a penalty if there's nobody to pay back to, and that would happen if they have no relatives after they die. Then the money goes to the Kohanim. Then the Torah goes into great detail the law of a woman whose husband warns her not to be with a particular man known as a sota, and he catches her with this man. And so when the temple stood, he would take her to the temple, and they would make her drink this bitter water. And if she had indeed had relations with this man, she would die as a result. If she did not, it says she would have children and be blessed for having gone through this. Then the Torah, and that's called the laws of the sota. And then the Torah tells us about a Nazir, a Jew who decides to become a Nazir, is a person who takes upon themselves a vow to do three things: to avoid any wine, grapes, or grape product, to let their hair grow long and not cut their hair, and not come in contact with any dead bodies. And so they could choose how long you want to be a Nazir for. When you end your Nazirite vow, you then must go to the temple, and there are certain sacrifices that are then offered at the end of the Nazirite vow. And then the Torah tells us an instruction to Aaron and his Kohanic descendants that they should bless the people with a special blessing, and the Torah transcribes the exact blessing the Kohanim should use to bless the people. Our custom is that we do that every Yom Tov on festivals, which will be tomorrow and Tuesday, will be the festival of Shavuot. We do the Kohanic, we have the Kohanim get up and do the Kohanic blessing. And you may recall some time ago, we did a class where we discussed the Kohanic blessing and the laws and the details of that. Well, then the second half of the Parsha, and again, it's a fairly long Parsha. The second half of the Parsha goes back to the inauguration of the temple, which was really the subject of the portion of Shemini in the book of Leviticus some portions ago. But it says that when they dedicated the temple, the 12 tribes, the leaders of the 12 tribes wanted to bring special sacrifices in honor of the dedication. And so first they brought a gift where they brought wagons and oxen to pull the wagons for the Levites to be able to carry the utensils or the various parts of the Mishkan they're going to carry through the desert. Then they also want to bring a sacrifice every day. So every day a different leader brings a sacrifice for the first 12 days after the inauguration. All 12 sacrifices turn out to be the exact same. And so the Torah goes into detail every single day. So it's the first day and goes into much detail of the sacrifice. It is word for word every day. Again and again, the same sacrifice. The Midrash tells us the reason for that is, although why the Torah repeats itself 12 times over, telling us the same sacrifice again and again and again, the same collection of sacrifices, is because although they all happened to bring the same one, each one had a different calculation. There was a different meaning behind the sacrifice that each one brought. And the Midrash goes into very, very great detail to explain the meaning behind each and every sacrifice brought by each of these leaders. So that is the Parsha in short. Let me open it quickly to any questions about the Parsha, since it's a long Parsha. Then we'll get on to Shavuot. Yes?
Did you say that a woman is punished if she sleeps with another man?
Yes.
What about if a man sleeps with
That's an excellent question. Let's leave it for after class. I did not say that. But we'll talk about it after class. So today is the last day of the counting of the Omer. So let us count the Omer together again. Once again, I'll say it in Hebrew, and you can repeat after me. Hayom, Tish'a, Va'arba'im, Yom, Shehem, Shiv'a, Shavuot, LaOmer. Today is 49 days, which is 7 weeks of the Omer. Today we complete the 7 weeks, and therefore tonight is going to be the festival of Shavuot. We have counted 49 days, and the 50th day is Shavuot. And so tonight is a Yom Tov. It starts tonight. It's a 48 or 48 and a half hour festival. It begins tonight with candle lighting at 7:42 p.m. And we light candles. We say it's bracha for the bracha that we do when we light candles for the holiday, along with the Shehechianu. We then we will have services here. We have a dinner, and everyone, we have a dinner at home. Although we do not start services or our dinner until after it is fully dark, which is about 8:30, in order that we have 50 complete. We can't start Shavuot until 50 complete days after Passover. But then there is a custom. Now, Shavuot, I should mention, celebrates the giving of the Torah. So we celebrate 50 days after Israel left Egypt. They came to Mount Sinai, and over there, Hashem gave them the Torah. When we say giving the Torah, we once did a class where we explained about the giving of the Torah, what exactly it means. It means we made a covenant with Hashem that we agreed to follow all of his commandments, and in exchange we became his chosen people, and we sealed that covenant by him appearing to us, to the entire people, and reciting the 10 commandments, or the Aseret Hadibrot, the 10 statements. And so every year on Shavuot, for the last 3,337 years, that's how many years ago it happened, we have been reading the 10 Commandments from the Torah as part of the service on Shavuot, in order that and that gives us a chance to essentially renew our vows, or renew our commitment to the Torah and to its commandments. So because of that, Shavuot really is focused on this giving of the Torah. We get ready for the giving of the Torah on the eve of Shavuot, which is tonight. We have a custom to stay up all night and study Torah. So we will have, and most synagogues do have, a late night Torah study session. We're going to be starting at 11 p.m. and we are going to have, what we've done here is we've had different people in the community speak about a particular theme, and our theme tonight is going to be influential Jewish women. So even if 11 p.m. is past your bedtime on most nights, tonight is an exception, where it is an old custom that we stay up late. You could nap a little today, and then come tonight at 11 p.m. and join us for that. Then tomorrow, once we usually stay up till daybreak, and then you could take a little nap before services. And tomorrow morning, we will have services at 10 a.m. And then during the services, we read from Parshat Yitro, from the portion of the giving of the Torah, and we read the 10 Commandments. The Rebbe encouraged that everybody, even children, adults, children, everyone should make an effort to come to Shul on Shavuot to hear the Ten Commandments. So services will begin at about 10 a.m. and followed by the Ten Commandments we will get to a little after 11 a.m. So be here tomorrow by 11 a.m. and you will get a chance to hear the Ten Commandments, which the Rebbe said is very, very important that we all get to hear it on Shavuot. Afterwards, in order to entice you to come, and because we have a old custom on Shavuot that we eat dairy, although normally on festivals we always eat meat on festivals. Of course, Jews are famous for eating brisket on the festivals. I think we once did a class where we spoke about why we eat brisket on our Yom Tovs, on our festivals. That is most festivals. On Shavuot, in addition to eating meat, whatever meat, we have a dairy meal. And so therefore here at the JCC, following the services at about noon, we will have a full dairy buffet with cheesecakes and blintzes, and we're also going to throw in ice cream, thank you, and we'll throw in some of the Italian dairy stuff, eggplant parmesan and baked ziti and a bunch of other delicious dairy foods. So that is tomorrow. Tuesday. So then tomorrow night is the second night of the holiday. And we light candles only after it is fully dark and you can see 3 stars outside, which is 8:43. We are allowed to light fires. Remember, the Yom Tov, and we mentioned this previously, the Yom Tov is similar to Shabbos, where we avoid most forms of work, with a few exceptions. We are allowed to do anything that involves food preparation, such as cooking and the like. We're allowed to do it if it involves direct food preparation. We are also allowed to light fires, but only from a pre-existing flame. We're forbidden from striking a match. If we already have a flame, you're allowed to light a fire. So in order to light candles tomorrow night, you need to light a 24-hour candle tonight that you will have candles to light tomorrow night from. The other thing we're allowed to do on the Yom Tov is we're allowed to carry. Normally we don't carry in a public area. On Shabbos, on Yom Tov, we are allowed to carry. There is a custom in some communities that along with lighting a candle, because we're going to say Yizkor on Tuesday morning, so there's a custom in some communities that along with lighting the holiday candles on Monday night at 8:43, after 8:43, to also light a Yizkor candle as well. And then we have a second dinner tomorrow night, and then on Tuesday is the second day of Yom Tov, and we will have services here at 10 a.m. We will have a Yizkor after the Torah reading, a little after 11 a.m., so be here after 11 a.m. It's one of 4 times a year that we mention our loved ones our deceased loved ones in front of the Torah and pledge to give charity in their honor, and they are Yom Kippur, Shmini Atzeret, the last day of Passover, and the second day of Shavuot. And so the second day of Shavuot, which will be Tuesday, we will be doing the Yizkor. And then following services here at the JCC, we're going to be doing our annual Shavuot barbecue. So you can join us for that. That will be about 12 p.m. or right after the Yizkor here. And then the holiday ends on Tuesday evening at 8:44 p.m. Any questions about Shavuot? It's all pretty straightforward.
The meals, so no meat or chicken.
Can you eat meat at the meals on Shavuot? That is an excellent question. So actually, in Shulchan Aruch, in the Code of Jewish Law, it says that although there is a custom to eat dairy on Shavuot, and we once did a class on eating dairy on Shavuot, where we spoke about this in detail. Although it is a custom to eat dairy on Shavuot, one should also eat meat on Shavuot as well, because there is a biblical command to eat meat on the festivals. We spoke about this when we did our class on brisket. And so one should do both. And the way it's described in Shulchan Aruch, this seems to be the widely accepted custom, was that on the first day of Shavuot, on the evening meals, people would generally have meat. And on the first day of Shavuot, people would first have a dairy meal, then they would end their dairy meal, take a little break, and then they would have a meat meal. So you definitely can have meat on Shavuot. There's no prohibition of having meat. Not only you can, you should have meat on Shavuot, and you should cook brisket on Shavuot.
What about after you eat milk, product, dairy, how long do you wait?
How long do you? That's an excellent question. After you eat milk, and not surprisingly, in Shulchan Aruch, in the codes of Jewish law, where does it speak about how long to wait after eating milk to dairy? It mentions it here about talking about Shavuot. So it depends. If you eat hard cheese that has been hardened over 6 months or more, then you must wait 6 hours afterwards. Most of our cheeses today are not hardened in such a way, unless you are eating those very fancy cheeses that are still hardened naturally. Most of them are done synthetically, and so so most of our cheeses are not an issue, and you can immediately after eating them, you can say the after blessing, rinse your mouth, and you can eat meat. There is a custom based on the Zohar to wait an hour before eating milk and meat, but the strict law is you can eat straight away, as long as you take a break. Yes. You cannot continue within the same meal. You have to end your meal, and it has to be a new meal. Yes.
Do you have any plant-based, like burgers at the barbecue?
I don't know. I don't know what the menu is, but I can find out. Okay. Yes, Victor.
Can you eat meat-like foods that are like meat analogs, vegan meats, and dairy at the same time?
Yes. Can you eat food that looks like meat and dairy at the same time? Yes, but it must be clear that it is not actual meat. You must have something to show that it is not real meat, perhaps the packaging or something on the table so that nobody makes that mistake. But yes, you can definitely eat meat analogs with dairy at the same time. If you want a cheeseburger with fake meat, there's nothing wrong with that in halacha, in Jewish law, so long as it is clear. You have your big, I forget what the company is called. What's it called? Impossible. You have the sign right there, and so everyone can see the packaging. They know that it's not real. But yes, you definitely can do that. So let us get to our subject now for today. So today, giving that tomorrow, is the date of the giving of the Torah. We're going to mark 3,337 years from the giving of the Torah. So it's appropriate that we speak about the Torah. We've done many, many classes about the Torah. I think last year we spoke about the oral Torah, but today I want to speak about one particular detail of the Torah, which is decoding the Torah. Something I think we've mentioned many times in classes, but never did a class dedicated to this subject, so I think it's very important that we understand how the Torah is decoded. So when Hashem gave the Torah to Moshe, Hashem gave him two Torahs, the written Torah, written as the 5 books of Moses, and the oral Torah. We did a class previously where we spoke about the oral Torah. Now we believe that the oral Torah, which was information that was taught to Moshe on Mount Sinai, well, we'll talk about what the oral Torah is in a minute, but we believe the oral Torah gives explanation and context to the written Torah. In other words, you cannot read the written Torah, the 5 books of Moses, and take it at face value. It says in the Torah that you do this. People often ask me, when do you do this or how do you do that? Reading the Torah at face value, we do not take the Torah at face value. Rather, we must read the written Torah within the context of the oral Torah. And we only understand the written Torah as explained in the oral Torah. So don't say, well, this is what it says. It doesn't matter what it says. It matters what the oral Torah tells us. Now, what is the oral Torah? So last year we did a class on the oral Torah, and we explained that there are primarily 3 different parts to the oral Torah. The first is the laws that were taught to Moshe on Mount Sinai. Hashem, the written Torah, includes within it 613 commandments. Hashem instructed Moshe on Mount Sinai all of those 613 commandments with all the various details about how to observe each commandment. So some of those instructions were written down in the written Torah, some were not. All of those instructions given to Moshe is what we call halacha lemoshe misinai, laws taught directly to Moshe at Mount Sinai. That is the first part of our oral Torah. Then there is the second part of the oral Torah. The second part of the oral Torah is Moshe was taught on Mount Sinai a code that can be used to decipher the written Torah. And so the laws, the second part of the oral Torah, are the laws that were deduced by the process of deciphering the written Torah using the code to decode the Torah. And then the third part of the oral Torah is the laws that were not part of the written Torah in code, not taught to Moses, but the laws that were enacted by the Sanhedrin, by the Supreme Council of Judaism, as long as it existed. We've mentioned many times, and we've had some classes dedicated to this, that for the first 1800 years of Judaism, we had a central body, a Sanhedrin, a Supreme Council, who was the final arbitrator of Jewish law. In addition to having the right to decide Jewish law, they also had the right to legislate, to create laws. Those laws that they created are binding up on all of Israel. Laws such as the holidays of Hanukkah and Purim are classic examples they were not around the days of Moses, but made by the members of the Sanhedrin. So those are the three parts of the oral Torah: the traditions taught to Moshe on Mount Sinai, the laws that can be deciphered or figured out through decoding the written Torah, and laws enacted by the Sanhedrin. Today, I'm going to focus on the second part, which is the laws of the Torah that can be deduced by decoding the written Torah. In other words, we believe that the written Torah is written entirely in code. It's written in code form. And so when you read the Torah, you should know you are reading a code. In order to know what it is really saying, it's not enough to know the translation or meaning of the words of the Torah. You need to know how to decipher the code. Without the keys to the code and without deciphering the code, you don't know what it's really saying. We were given those keys to decipher the code as part of the oral Torah that was taught to Moshe on Mount Sinai. He was taught the keys to decipher the code of the Torah. And when we use those keys, we can discover the true meaning of the words of the Torah. Before we even begin to explain what those keys are and how they are used, let me first show you some evidence that the Torah clearly was never meant to be read at face value. It was originally written by Moshe, dictated by Hashem, written by Moshe, word for word dictated by Hashem, letter for letter, with the intent of it being a code. And if you read the Torah carefully, that becomes very evident in many, many places in the Torah where it cannot be taken at face value. There must be a code. For example, the Torah in Exodus, this is in Parshat Mishpatim, Exodus 22, verse 6, the Torah writes the following. If a man gives his neighbor money or articles for safekeeping, and it is stolen from the man's house, if the thief is found, he shall pay double. If the thief is not found, the homeowner shall approach the judges to swear that he has not laid his hand upon his neighbor's property. And then listen to this one. For any sinful matter, for a bull, for a donkey, for a lamb, for a garment, for any lost article, concerning that which he will say, this is it, the plea of both parties should come to the judges, and whoever the judges declare guilty shall pay double to his neighbor. What does that mean? That verse seems to be very cryptic. We know the first two verses seem to make a lot of sense. Someone is holding something and it is stolen and the thief is found, then they pay double. The thief pays double. If the thief is not found, then the person who is holding the money, who is holding the item for safekeeping, must swear that they didn't take it. But then it adds this verse, for any sinful matter, a bull, a donkey, a lamb, a garment, for any lost article, concerning that which he will say that it is his, that this is it, the pleas of both parties shall pay twofold to his neighbor. What does it mean? So without explanation, without an oral tradition to understand it, you would not know what it means. In particular, I want to focus on one particular part of the verse that makes it very clear that it's not just cryptic, but there's clearly a code here. It starts off by saying, and I'll tell you, by decoding the Torah, we know that this verse is referring to if the fellow, the person whom the article was given to, who was minding the article, themselves took it and lied that it was stolen. They stole it themselves. And then they are caught. So it says, for any sinful matter, they stole it, right? And then it adds a bull, a donkey, a lamb, a garment, for any lost article, right? Any article that they took. Now, why does the Torah say that? Why does it say for any item? Then it gives us 4 examples, and then it says for any item again. Why is it doing that? Clearly, there's some sort of code here that the Torah is alluding to, that it wants to teach us something. Another example, in Parshat Re'eh, this is in Deuteronomy chapter 14. The Torah tells us that you must separate, in addition to the tithe that's given to the Levite, 10% of your produce in the land of Israel, you must separate another 10%. And that 10% must be brought to Jerusalem, and it must be eaten in Jerusalem. If, however, the Torah says, there's too much produce, or you live too far away to be able to schlep, Torah doesn't use the word schlep, it's Yiddish, but to be able to take all that produce to Jerusalem, then what you can do is exchange that produce for money. And then the Torah says you should bring the money to Jerusalem, and you should spend the money, and the Torah says as follows: you shall turn that money into whatever your soul desires, cattle, sheep, new wine, old wine, or whatever your soul desires, and you shall eat there before the Lord your God. You shall rejoice, you and your household. Now that's strange. It says you can then use the money to buy whatever your soul desires. Then it says cattle, sheep, new wine, old wine. Then it adds whatever your soul desires. Again, same thing, right? Why does it say anything? Then it gives you 4 examples, and then it says anything again. So these are just 2 of countless examples throughout the Torah. It's all over the Torah of places where the Torah does these strange things, where it jumps between general statements and details and adds extra words that seem unnecessary and says words that are cryptic, and a lot of it just cannot be understood at face value. It's clear that it is written in some sort of code. Furthermore, the written Torah itself has multiple contradictions within the written Torah. And I'm focused here not on the stories, there's contradictions in the stories, and that's a subject of its own, but in the laws, there seem to be multiple contradictions. For example, the Torah warns us in Parshat Kedoshim, in Leviticus 19:27, do not destroy the corners of your beard. Lo sashchit et pa'at zekanecha. Do not destroy the corners of your beard. Then, just 2 chapters later, in Parshat Emor, chapter 21 of Leviticus, the Torah gives special instructions just for Kohanim, the priests who are male descendants of Aaron. And among the various instructions given to the Kohanim, it says that they should not destroy the corners of their beard. Well, is this prohibition of not destroying your beard, is that a prohibition of just for Kohanim, or is that a prohibition to all Jews? In one place, the Torah says it as a general prohibition for all Jews. And elsewhere, in Parshat Emor, in another place, the Torah says it just for Kohanim. Which one is it? We once did a class on shaving your beard. So that's you could go back there if you want to know the exact details of the Torah's prohibition on shaving. And there are countless other examples. I'm just giving you a few. in each. I'm just giving you a few examples, but there are countless other examples where the words of the Torah in different places appear to contradict each other. So again, if the Torah is meant to be read at face value, you're in trouble. How do you explain it? But once we know that the Torah is not meant to be read at face, let me give you one more example. I was going to give you 2 examples. In Parshat Tzav, that's Leviticus chapter 7, the Torah tells us multiple times throughout that chapter that the Kohen who offers a sacrifice in the temple on behalf of a Jew who brings the sacrifice, right? The Jew brings the sacrifice to the temple. The Kohen is the one that actually slaughters it and does the process of offering the sacrifice. So the Torah tells us that the parts of the animal that people get to eat, those parts of the animal, some of it goes to the person himself, some of it goes to the Kohen. The Kohen who offers it, they get to eat it. And the Torah says that multiple times. Later, however, in Deuteronomy, in Parshat Shoftim, Deuteronomy chapter 18, the Torah says that the Kohanim get to divide the sacrifices among them. Again, which one is it? Does the Kohen who offers the sacrifice get to keep the meat of the sacrifice he offered? Or do all the Kohanim serving in the temple get to divide it among them? Which one is it? And there are countless other of these apparent contradictions in the Torah. You take the Torah at face value, it would be hard to explain these. But once we understand that the Torah is written in code, then the contradictions are just part of the code. And once you decipher the code, you can figure it out. Now, furthermore, to further this argument that it is clear that the Torah was never meant to be read at face value, but was meant to be understood as a code, the Torah has many ambiguous statements that cannot be understood at face value. And I'll give you just 2 examples. There are countless of examples of these. But one example is the Torah in Parshat Acharei, in Leviticus 16, tells us that on Yom Kippur, te'anu et nafshotechem, you should afflict yourselves. How do you afflict yourselves on Yom Kippur? That's what the Torah says you should do. How should you afflict yourselves? What should you do? Should you beat yourself? It doesn't say what you should do to afflict yourselves. It's only by deciphering the code that we'll be able, we'll soon explain how, that we can figure out that it actually means to fast, right? We fast on Yom Kippur. We don't eat and drink. We know what afflict yourself means, but the only way we know what that means is thanks to our deciphering of the code. Or in Parshat Pinchas, chapter 29, Numbers chapter 29, the Torah says about Rosh Hashanah, Yom Truah Yiyeh Lachem. It should be a day of wailing for you. What does that mean, a day of wailing? That you're supposed to scream? What does it mean? It's only through deciphering the code that we know that it means you have to blow 9 blasts with a shofar. And then we do a lot more than 9. That's a separate story of how we got to that. But the original biblical command is to blow 9 blasts with a shofar. From all the above, it is clear that the Torah cannot be read at face value, nor was it ever written with the intention that it should be read at face value. Its code is it's not meant to be read, it's rather a code that is meant to be deciphered using the keys for the code. Now, just to note, although I told you that the Torah is written in code, and we're supposed to decipher the code, our sages do say, Ein mikra yotze midei pshuta, which means that generally the Torah can be read at face value. What that means is that every verse in the Torah has a simple meaning, in other words, a simple explanation, close to face value, or a pretty basic explanation, usually without the need for decoding, that as it can be understood. And every verse can kind of be understood at face value in understanding the basic meaning. In other words, the Torah can be read as is, but just as part of an exercise of studying the Torah. But it cannot, if you're trying to figure out the laws, the halacha, you can never derive the halacha from a straight verse of the Torah. You can only derive the halacha when understood within the context of the oral tradition and by deciphering the code. So yes, there is, and Rashi often will give us, and other commentaries will often give us explanations that actually contradict the halacha, explaining the simple reading of the Torah that contradict the law as we know it. However, that is only with regard to, there is kind of this option of studying the Torah as is, but we can never derive laws from a simple reading of the Torah. The halacha, the laws of the Torah, were meant to only be understood by deciphering the code. So how do we decipher the code of the Torah? Where do we find the keys to decipher the code? So the keys can be found scattered throughout the many, many books of our oral law, such as the Mishnah, the Talmud, the Midrash. But we do have at least one place where most of the keys are put together and organized and explained, and that is at the beginning of a Midrash known as the Sifri, or sometimes referred to as Torat Kohanim. So Midrash, and I think I went to the class on Midrash, Midrash is a genre, a section of Jewish scholarship that was written as commentary on the Torah around the same time that the Mishnah was written. So in the late second, early third century, late 100s, early 200s. And so we have a Midrash from that period known as Sifri, which is a commentary on the book of Vayikra, on the book of Leviticus. And at the very beginning of the Sifri, it actually goes through 13 keys for deciphering the Torah. And it goes and then explains each of these 13 keys. And although that's not entirely comprehensive, there are some that are not included here, but it includes the bulk and the important keys for deciphering the Torah. In fact, these 13 keys for deciphering the Torah are so important to Judaism, so important that we know them and we be familiar with them in order that we can decipher the Torah, that our sages institute that we should recite these 13 keys every single day before our morning prayers. So before we start our morning prayers, we have a number of kind of things that we read before our morning prayers, but one of those things that we read every morning, and it can be found in your Siddur, in your prayer book, in the blue prayer book that we use here in the shul. It's on page 25, and so you're welcome to open the Siddur and find it there. But there we have the 13 keys for deciphering the Torah. Very important, and so important that we need to recite it every day, so we know that you need to decipher the Torah and how to do it, how the Torah is decoded. Yes, Rob?
Was it intentionally coded?
It was intentionally written in code. It was intentionally written in code. The question is, why was it intentionally written in code? And that is because Hashem wanted that primarily our Torah should be an oral Torah. The code is only to help us remember it. So, but primarily it should be an oral Torah, and it was supposed to be an oral Torah in order to help us better preserve it as a live document. At least one reason why it was given as an oral Torah. There's a number of reasons. I think we spoke about it when we did our class on the oral Torah. But the Torah was intentionally written in code. Any other questions? So what are these 13 keys? So I'm not going to go through all of them now. It would take a very long time to go through all of them. Each one is quite complex. They're not simple, easy keys. They're complex keys. I'm going to go through just a few of them, very, very in brief, just to give you a sampling. In fact, understanding these keys and knowing how to apply them properly is itself a very difficult study to do. So we're not going to get into all of them, and it's quite a complex study. But just to give you a little bit of a taste so you can understand the keys and how the Torah is deciphered. So the first key in the list that we recite in our Siddur that comes from the book of Sifri, attributed to Rabbi Yishmael, is kal v'chomer, which literally translates light and heavy. Light and heavy is a basic logical argument. And the argument goes like this. If the law applies in scenario A, where logically it is less likely for such a law to apply, then certainly that law would apply in scenario B, where it would be more likely for this law to apply. So if the law applies in the less likely scenario, it should certainly apply in the more likely scenario. So it's a basic logical argument. And we use this throughout the Torah in order to derive laws. For example, the Torah forbids a person from having relations, part of the various prohibitions of incest mentioned in Parshat Acharei, in the book of Leviticus. The Torah forbids a person from having relations with their granddaughter. But the Torah does not, it forbids us from doing so. The Torah does not anywhere forbid a person from having relations with their daughter. However, our sages say, given that the daughter is a closer relation to the granddaughter, and incest is a prohibition of close relations, so we can logically argue using the kal v'chomer argument. If relations with one's granddaughter, which is a more distant relationship, is forbidden, then certainly relations with one's daughter, which is a closer relationship, should certainly be forbidden. So that is a classic example of the kal v'chomer argument. Another example, the Torah tells us in Parshat Shemini, this is Leviticus chapter 11. The Torah says, "Uvenivlatam lo tiga'u," do not touch carcasses of animals. So if you have an animal that dies and is not slaughtered properly, do not touch their carcass. Now doing so, touching the carcass of a dead animal, would make one tamei. However, it would make one ritually impure. We've spoken before about the laws of ritual purity. Now, the Torah tells us also in Parshat Emor, in Leviticus 21, that Kohanim, male descendants of Aaron, are not allowed to come in contact with dead people. Person dies, the Kohen is not allowed to go to the cemetery, is not allowed to go to the funeral, except for their immediate relatives. They're not allowed to come in contact with the dead. This ban is only for Kohanim, not for other Jews that are not Kohanim. So now, if one comes in contact with a dead body, the law is that one becomes an av hatumah, or a primary level impurity. If one comes in contact with a dead carcass of an animal, one becomes a vlad hatumah, or a secondary level impurity. So now, if Kohanim are forbidden from coming in contact with a dead person, which would make them an av hatumah, a primary level impurity, and yet other Jews, other Yisraelim, are permitted to come in contact with the dead, with dead bodies, though it will make them a primary level impurity. Once they're impure, they're not allowed to go into the temple or eat sacrificial meat, but they're allowed to become tamei. We do all the time. Then certainly, if a Yisrael can become tamei by touching a primary level impurity, by coming in contact with the dead, certainly they should be allowed to become tamei with a secondary level impurity by coming in contact with the dead carcass of an animal. So therefore, we must then say that verse that says, "Do not touch the carcasses of dead animals," is not a prohibition and should not be understood at face value. Because using the kal v'chomer argument, if Yisraelim, Israelites, are permitted to become tamei to a dead person, certainly, which gives them a primary level impurity, certainly they are permitted to become tamei by coming in contact with a dead animal, which gives only a second level impurity. So from here we could use, from this Kal Vachomer, we can deduce that although the Torah clearly says otherwise, a person can touch the carcass of a dead animal. And we do so all the time. And there's no prohibition in the Torah from coming in contact with the carcass of the dead animal. What then does the Torah mean? It means something else. It must be understood in context. I'm not going to get into that right now, exactly what it does mean. But that is another example of how the Kal Vachomer argument is employed over here to even show that a verse is not meant to be understood as it says. It's meant to mean something else. That verse needs to be deciphered in its own way, but that employs other forms and not for now.
Seems to me that there's some place that says don't come in contact with an animal that has died by an accident or disease or something like that. Not necessarily, you slaughtered and everything.
If it's slaughtered, you definitely can touch it. A nevela is an animal that was not slaughtered.
Yeah.
Yes. But even so, although the Torah says do not touch it, certainly you can touch it based on the Kal Vachomer argument. The Torah then means something else entirely. Yes?
You said that you're supposed to read this every morning, but you said it was also a very long thing. So how do you...
So it's actually in the Siddur, very good question. We said that it's very long and complex, and how then do we read something so long and complex every morning? So in the Siddur, it's only one page, and it only gives us the names of the 13 keys. It doesn't explain how each one works. The Torah Kohanim then continues to explain how each one works, but we don't read that part every morning. We don't get into all the details of how it works. I'm giving you an explanation now, but in the Siddur itself, it only gives you the keys themselves. Yes?
So a Cohen is not supposed to be found dead.
Mm-hmm.
So does that mean they can't go to any funerals?
Correct. A Cohen cannot go to any funerals except for the funerals of their immediate relatives. And when we did our class on Kohanim, we spoke about that. Yes. A second of the 13 rules, and by far the most commonly used rule in decoding the Torah, is the rule of Gezerah Shava. Often the Torah uses words where the exact meaning of the word is unclear. When the Torah uses the same word in another place, but makes its meaning clear, we apply the meaning from the clear use to the ambiguous one. So to use an example that we brought earlier, the Torah says on Yom Kippur, Te'anu et nafshotechem, you shall afflict yourselves on Yom Kippur. What does that mean? How do you afflict yourself on Yom Kippur? Well, elsewhere in the Torah, in Parshat Ekev, in Deuteronomy chapter 8, the Torah says, Vaya'ancha vayar'ivecha. Speaking of Hashem leading us through the desert, and it says that Hashem afflicted you and he starved you till he gave you the manna, right? First we had no food and then we got the manna. So he afflicted you and he starved you. How did Hashem afflict you? Through starvation. What then does the word Vaya'ancha, what does the word te'anu, afflicting, then mean? It means through fasting, through starvation. So from here we learn that on Yom Kippur, we are not allowed to eat. Another example, and I'm just again giving a few examples. There are hundreds and hundreds of examples, if not thousands of each of these. Another example is regarding the Passover sacrifice. It says in Parshat Bahalotcha, in Numbers chapter 9, it says, which will be next week's Parsha, V'yasu v'nei Yisrael et ha-pesach b'moado. The children of Israel shall offer the Passover sacrifice in its correct time. When is its correct time? On the 14th day of the month of Nisan. So every year on the 14th day of the month of Nisan, we are to offer a Passover sacrifice. What happens though, which actually happened this past Passover, what happens when the 14th day of the month of Nisan, the day before Passover, is Shabbat? Can you offer the Passover sacrifice on Shabbat? When the Torah says you shall offer the Passover sacrifice in its correct time, does that mean even on Shabbat? Well, there's another verse in the Torah speaking about the daily sacrifice. They would bring a daily sacrifice twice a day, once in the morning, once in the afternoon in the temple. And the Torah says that about this daily sacrifice, this is in Numbers chapter 28 in Parshat Pinchas, Tishmeru lahakriv li b'moado. You shall guard this daily sacrifice to offer it for me in its appointed time, in its correct time. Using the same word, moado, in its correct time. Now, we offer the daily sacrifice every single day. Do we offer the daily sacrifice on Shabbat? Yes, we do. How do we know that? Because the Torah, when speaking about the special sacrifices to be offered on Shabbat, it says, Milvad olat hatamid, besides the daily sacrifice. Offer the Shabbat sacrifice in addition to the daily sacrifice. So clearly the daily sacrifice is offered on Shabbat. The daily sacrifice, it says to offer it b'mo'ado, in its appointed time, in its correct time. So we see that the word b'mo'ado in its correct time means even on Shabbat. By extension, the Passover sacrifice, about which it says the same words, you should offer the Passover sacrifice b'mo'ado in its correct time, would mean even on Shabbat. And therefore, it will mean that when the day before Passover is Shabbat, you should offer the Passover sacrifice even on Shabbat. So again, another use of this concept of Gzera Shava, a word we don't understand its meaning in one place, or we're unclear about perhaps a detail within its meaning, and we find its meaning elsewhere, and we apply its meaning elsewhere to the meaning in the ambiguous place. A third, and also very common tool that's used, key that's used to decode the Torah is Binyan Av. Binyan Av means that when the Torah says a statement regarding one particular thing, we will extend that rule to anything that is similar. That is similar. We will extend that rule. The Torah only mentioned one thing, and the Torah often, rather than giving rules, the Torah gives examples. So the Torah gives an example in one thing, we know to extend it to everything. Here's just some examples again. The Torah in Parshat Ki Teitzei in Deuteronomy chapter 23 tells us, Ki tavo bekamat re'echa v'katafta mililot biyadecha. When you are working with grain belonging to a landowner and they hire the worker to pick grain, then the worker is allowed to pick some of the kernels and chew the kernels. So if you're working with grain, you're allowed, and harvesting the grain, the worker is allowed to pick kernels and chew the kernels, and the landowner who's employing the worker is not allowed to stop the worker from eating the kernels that they are working with. But why only kernels? The same would exist. The Binyan Av tells us, don't limit it to kernels. Any worker working with food has the right to eat the food that they're working with. And so that law is then extended through this process of Binyan Av to any similar mitzvah, any similar thing, any similar item. So long as it's similar, it's food. Any worker who's working with food would be allowed to eat the food that they're working with. A separate mitzvah that animals working with food have to be allowed to eat the food they're working with. Yes. Another example. The Torah forbids us from cursing someone who is deaf. Lot tekalel cherish. This is in Parshat Mishpatim. The Torah only tells us not to curse deaf people. But we then, using the Binyan Av, we say, why just deaf people? They can't hear it. Well, if someone else can hear it, right, why should you be allowed to curse them? So we extend that prohibition, not just deaf people, but to anyone. You're not allowed to curse anyone. That means wishing bad on other people. You're not allowed to do that, right? You're not allowed to curse anyone. It's not just limited to deaf people. Sometimes deaf.
Yeah.
What are you, deaf?
We can't curse you.
Yes.
What about evil people?
Well, I'm not going to get into the details of the laws right now. I'm trying to give you examples of how these are employed. Sometimes the binyan av is used in a way where a particular term is used in one place in a particular way, and we could then extend its meaning on one place to the entire Torah. For example, the Torah in Parashat Shoftim tells us, "Lo yakum eid echad beish," that a single witness cannot be trusted to testify against a person. That's what the Torah says. Now the Torah uses the term Eid echad, one witness. It could have just said, Lo yakum ed ba'ish. A witness should not stand up against another person. A witness would be one person, right? Why do I have to say Eid echad, one witness? It must then be that the word Eid, witness, does not mean one. Witness then means more than one. The word Eid, witness in Hebrew, means at least two. So from here we learn to extend that from here we can deduce that every time we have the word aid in the Torah, witness, it always means not witness, even though it's singular form, but witnesses. There are a lot of words in English that even when you speak of many, you use singular form. Sheep, fish, right? There are many such things. They use singular form when speaking of many. So witness, at least in Hebrew, aid, when using that word, it means multiple witnesses. That's why when the Torah wants to speak of only one witness, it specifies aid echad. Another common rule used in deciphering the Torah is the rule of klal uprat, which is a general statement, and then a detail, and then a general statement. So the Torah often will move between general statements and details. And we saw that earlier in some of the examples I gave you, where sometimes the Torah will give a general statement and then offer details. Sometimes the Torah will just give details and then a general statement after. Sometimes the Torah does general statement, details, general statement. And sometimes the Torah does details, general statement, details. Each one is there to teach you something else. When the Torah, in the two examples I gave you earlier, the Torah employed klal or prat or klal. A general statement, details, and then a general statement again. And when the Torah does that, what it wants to tell you is that this law applies to anything that falls in the same category as the details. In other words, we have to find a common denominator between the various details, and anything that falls into that common denominator would be included as well. For example, we spoke of the fellow who takes an item was deposited by him, and he claims that it was stolen, and he must swear. And there it said for any sinful act, then we gave details, an ox, donkey, or clothing, and then we gave a general statement, right, for any lost object. So it is coming to tell us that the person who is holding it only needs to swear in front of the court that they did not take it, only if it is similar to those items mentioned, the animals and the clothing. It must be similar. There must be a common denominator between them that the common denominators between them, that anything that falls into those common denominators would be included. What common denominators are there between them? Well, they're all movable. And they also all have intrinsic value. So that would exclude land. If there was a dispute over land, you would not have to swear in court if there was a dispute over land. It would also not include documents that don't have intrinsic value. Documents are just a piece of paper, right? They're worth just the value of the piece of paper, which once written on is worth very, very little. But it doesn't have intrinsic value. It has value of what can be done with it. So it would exclude those things. Our second example that we gave was from the tithe, that we said you have to separate tithes and exchange that tithe for money and bring that money to Jerusalem, to the temple. And then in the Jerusalem, you must then spend that money. And we gave, and the example that we gave was, what we said first, whatever your soul desires, cattle, sheep, new wine, old wine, or whatever your soul desires. What do those things have in common? Cattle, sheep, new wine, and old wine. They are food, they're edible, and they come from land or animals, right? From living things. The same would be anything that is edible and anything that comes from land or animals, from plants or animals, right? That would exclude things that, say, minerals, like salt or water, or something that is not edible, right, would be excluded. You would not be able to spend your tithe money, your Maser Sheni money, on buying a water bottle, on buying, right, because it's not plant or animal based. You would not be able to spend it on buying yourself a piece of jewelry or piece of clothing, because it must be food. Another commonly used system employed in the Torah is ribuyim and miutim. And what this means is that every word in the Torah is necessary. There is not a single extra word in the Torah. Any word that appears to be extra is either a ribuy, is either, depending on the meaning of the word, some words are ribuyim, are inclusive words, and some words are miutim, they are exclusive words. And if it's an inclusive word, it's coming to add something to the law spoken of. If it is an exclusive word, it's coming to exclude something from the law spoken of. A classic example for this is, it says in the Torah, in Parshat Ve'etchanan, Et Hashem Elokecha Tira, you shall fear Hashem your God. It doesn't say Hashem Elokecha Tira, fear Hashem your God. It adds at the beginning of that phrase a word, Et. Now, Et is really a kind of a word in Hebrew that doesn't really have much meaning. It's just kind of thrown in at the beginning of a phrase, but it doesn't really mean anything. But it's extra. Respecting God, you must also respect something similar to God. Well, what could be similar to God that you respect? Well, they say Torah scholars, people that are knowledgeable in Hashem's Torah, must be respected as well, and we learned that from this verse. So these are just some examples of what is really we could have a whole series of classes on the deciphering of the Torah. We once did it a couple of years ago. We once did a series of classes when we were going through the Siddur. But we could do a whole series of classes on deciphering the various ways of deciphering the Torah. There are many books written on this. Now, for the first 1,500 years of our history, right? Remember, the Torah was given 3,337 years ago. So for the first 1,500 years or so of our history, a lot of work was put into deciphering the Torah and figuring out the laws by our scholars. And an enormous amount of work was put into it, with also all the verses in the Torah essentially being deciphered using these various forms. However, the Mishnah was about written within the next century. Dozens of other books were written within the next 300 years. The Talmud was written, which became the most comprehensive work of our oral law. Today, we have pretty much all the laws that were deduced by deciphering the Torah over the kind of early period of Judaism. So the Torah has essentially been, by and large, deciphered. And we now have the laws that are now discussed or that are now mentioned in the Talmud. And so now we don't need to go back to deciphering the Torah to find laws. We just have to go read the Talmud to find laws. And that's why the Talmud is today our primary source of law. When someone cannot find a source in the Talmud, some scholars have gone back to the Torah itself using those methods employed to try to decipher law. But by and large, our laws can be understood and found directly in the Talmud itself. And so since the writing of the Mishnah and the Sifra and Sifri and all the books various midrashim, we have spent less time trying to decipher the Torah and more time studying the Talmud, the laws that we now have from the Torah deciphered, and explaining, understanding those laws, applying those laws, figuring out their application to new cases and the like. And so while, yes, we study and we know how to decipher the laws of the code of the Torah, scholars, by and large, since the Talmud was written, have not focused extensively on deciphering the keys, the code of the Torah. It's been deciphered already. We mostly focus on understanding the laws as we have them today. However, as a result, although some collections were created in the 200s of the deciphering of collections of decoding the Torah were collected. In other words, going through the Torah and showing different verses how they are decoded. We have various collections in different books, nothing that was really comprehensive. So it wasn't until the late 19th century that scholars, remember the primary focus has been studying the Talmud, but in the late 19th century, scholars turned back to deciphering the Torah and said, why don't we create something comprehensive that can collect all the various sources that we have of deciphering every verse in the Torah, verse by verse, so we can show how each and every verse is deciphered. So the first such work was composed by a scholar called Rabbi Baruch Epstein from Lithuania in the late 19th century, very late 19th century, 1890s, called Torah Tamima. And that is widely published, a widely used book today. It's a 5-volume book that goes through the entire Torah, verse by verse, and collects various sources showing how the Torah was deciphered. Later, in the second half of the 20th century, there was another scholar, Rabbi Menachem Kasher, who lived in Israel, who decided to do a much, much more comprehensive job that was done by the Torah Tamima, and he put out a 40-volume work called Torah Shlema that goes through the entire verse by verse. He only covered 4 out of the 5 books of the Torah. He never got to finish it. He died before he finished it, and nobody has completed it yet. But he went through a comprehensive work showing verse by verse, line by line, word by word, letter by letter, showing the deeper meanings of the Torah exactly as our sages have decoded it. So at least for the 4 books of the Torah, we now have an easy X-to-Access book, Torah Shlema, in which it's a big set, but today there's kind of smaller versions, condensed versions. You can buy a 10-volume, but they that go through and show us how the Torah is decoded. Again, for halacha today, for the law today, we focus less on deciphering the Torah, since it's all been deciphered a very, very long time ago. While it's fascinating to study the Torah and see how it was deciphered, it doesn't impact that much halacha today, but rather halacha today is derived from the Talmud and Talmudic era works. But it is very important to understand this, because I get asked this question all the time. The Torah says that you should do this or do that, right? When are we going to, right? Do you do this? Do you, stone people who, right? And whatever and they quote the Torah as saying different things. And then, but the problem is that they may quote many things, but that is not the meaning of the Torah. We never read the Torah at face value. We always understood the instructions, the commandments, the laws of the Torah to be understood within as a code to be deciphered, and within the context of the oral tradition, and within the context of the 13 keys with which we decipher the code. So the key is that we need to focus on, we need to know that the Torah is not meant to be taken at face value. It always must be understood in context, and that is why I would strongly encourage, if you haven't yet read the Torah, you definitely should. I've mentioned that many times. The best way to do that is to come to shul every week and hear the parsha being read. You read the whole Torah. Ideally, when you read the Torah, you should read it with a Jewish translation. If you read it with a non-Jewish translation, now remember, non-Jews, they never had our oral Torah. They got the written Torah translated, but they never got the oral Torah. So when they translated the written Torah, they took it at face value. So they got everything all wrong because they didn't understand it. They didn't know that it was a code. And so a lot of the non-Jewish translations of the Torah are by and large mistranslations because they don't understand the context with which the Torah is supposed to be understood. And therefore it's important to have a good Jewish translation when you study the Torah and understand and know that laws are not derived directly from the written Torah at face value, but rather through the code, and today through the Talmud.